Hi, folks. Welcome to session 2 of the Food Safety Webinar Series. I hope everybody can hear me. This one's about building the future of food safety and technology with Dr. Darin Detwiler. We're going to do a little bit of housekeeping for the Zoom call in case those that are attending aren't familiar with how this works. All participants will have their audio and video turned off. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end, so just feel free to use that button or use the chat button. I'll monitor both throughout the session and we'll address them during the live Q&A session at the end. So if you're not familiar with Perennia, our vision is Nova Scotia is a recognized world leader in producing innovative, environmentally responsible, and safe food of impeccable quality. Mission is supporting growth, transformation, and economic development in Nova Scotia's agriculture, seafood, and food and beverage sectors. So our service areas are agriculture, quality and food safety, product development, lab services, and fisheries. And I want to bring to your attention, we have a couple of agri conferences coming up. Please see our website for the Minister of Agriculture digital series. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Darin Detwiler. He's the founder and CEO of Detwiler Consulting Group. He's internationally recognized and respected food policy expert with over 25 years experience in shaping federal food policy. He's also an assistant dean at Northeastern University's College of Professional Studies and the lead faculty of the Regulatory Affairs and Food program. He also is an author of 2 books, Past, Present, and Predictions, and as well as the topic we're dealing with today, Building the Future of Food Safety. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so Dr. Detwiler can share his.
Great. Thank you very much and welcome everybody. And I am just pulling up my screen. All right, well, welcome everybody. This is Building the Future of Food Safety Technology. And I'm really excited to be here talking about this. I explored this topic in my book of the same title, and it came about initially as a request from the publisher for the conclusion of my first book. But at the time I said 2 things. One is that I thought it didn't really have a good fit with looking more at a historical and personal side of food safety. At the same time, I was noticing that there was a disconnect in terms of when I was attending food safety events, but specifically focused on blockchain and technology. You know, you had these decision makers, you had these executives at different companies who were talking about food safety and technology, and there was some misconceptions and some gaps in these communications. I decided to focus on this in this different way. I want to go and start here by looking at the idea of as means for an introduction. Let's look back at history. If we look at industrial revolutions, we can see the first industrial revolution, second, third, and fourth. Many of us have heard of these and can place these within a bit of a timeline. But to differentiate here, the first industrial revolution was when we started seeing steam machines and urbanization. This had a significant impact on the food industry in terms of mechanizing some of the food manufacturing, and in terms of where people were going to get their food. The second industrial revolution, we saw internal combustion and more urbanization, but also imperialism and immigration, impacting not only the quantity of people that we had to feed here in North America, but where people were coming from to join that workforce. The third industrial revolution is the digital or the internet revolution, whereas the fourth, which we're kind of seeing starting right about now, looks at robotics, artificial intelligence, blockchain, even autonomous vehicles. Now, some people can parallel this with the idea of societies, society 0.1 and then 1.0 to 5.0. And these are rather similar, the idea of tool making, domestication, and then with society 2.0, we see industrial revolution and urbanization. And then we get into digitalization, convergence of humans and technology, and then finally, this future where we'll see the idea of some transcendence, the idea of technology, very much like our science fiction shows that we've seen in the future, um, um, kind of being a little bit more autonomous, decision making, that kind of a thing. Now, if we put this into context of food technologies specifically, we can see a timeline in which everything from fire through to GMOs and pulse electric field processing on a timeline here. We can see how Society 2.0 and even the first, second, third, and fourth industrial revolutions would kind of play out with this. So this is just a way of kind of looking at the fact that there has been changes in technology over time. And it's important to understand that with these technologies comes significant impact, not only in terms of food safety and quality and even food fraud, but also consumer behavior and the types of foods that are out there. It used to be that when we talk about food safety, we're predominantly talking about meat and poultry. But today we talk about food safety in terms of produce, ready to eat foods, commercially packaged goods, and even with multiple ways in which food is sold: retail, restaurant, hybrid, use of apps, delivery, partial delivery, packaged, uncooked. And the fact that we continue to have a growth in the number of spices and ingredients that are sourced internationally. If we look at how 2020 is redefining technology, we can see everything from the growth. Some people would say it's a bit of a standoff, if you will, or we've been on pause in terms of the idea of plant-based food and cell-cultured meat. We also see growth, especially during the pandemic, of HelloFresh, Blue Apron, other means in which food is packaged and distributed for the consumer to cook on their own. We can see everything from ordering online and picking up to having restaurants deliver via third parties like Uber Eats and Grubhub, people ordering food online, having food delivered, and even delivery is not just literally regulated or relegated to cars. In Dubai, we've seen a radical growth over the last 5 or 6 years of motorcycle delivery. We're even seeing a bit of growth in terms of the use of drones, both in terms of on the ground and off and in the air. We also look at information, and we'll be expanding on this a little bit in this presentation. But information and how it follows food's journey, is very similar. Looking at how people, especially the growth of consumers over the last year, using social media to share information, to gain information. There's even sources like iwaspoisoned.com where people can crowdsource their information about getting foodborne illness. Now, this is a bit of a step beyond simply leaving a review at Yelp. And research is conducted or has concluded that consumers are more likely to use online and social media, online resources and social media to communicate foodborne illness symptoms and findings and details than actually contacting their local health authorities. But what about um, gaining information with this growth of, for instance, the QR codes? There are some concerns. While QR codes are being explored in terms of how much information it could be able to share, there's a concern in terms of not only the fact that it doesn't truly show what's in your food right there when at that point of sale, and that you have this digital divide. Not everyone is able to read a QR code. There's also the concern that you have certain groups of people who, whether it's because of their economic status or their age or their their technology and adoption of technology and programs, they're not going to be able to gain access to the same amount of information as they would if people just printed it on the package itself. Even with 2020 and the last few years, we've also seen a radical change with technology. Social media was not an issue, obviously, before 25, 30 years ago. Um, Used to be, if you see the red line here, that most change, if there was a problem with food, you'd have some companies that would react to stakeholder expectations and political developments, but most companies would start to change after there was legislation or litigation, changes in regulation and oversight, and definitely court cases. Um, but adding to the court cases is the idea of social media and how stakeholder expectation and stakeholder awareness has changed radically over the last quarter century. Everything from memes and political cartoons online, as you see on the left there with Chipotle and Blue Bowl ice cream, but even the idea of a Department of Health, local health officials putting out information on Twitter and using social media to communicate with the public at large about specific information. This is something that we had never seen before. With these kind of increased awareness and means of putting information out, obviously we hope to utilize these options and to reduce liabilities. But obviously, as you can imagine, there's a lot more to this issue. So looking at food technology, and the future needs for technology, there's a disconnect, if you will, between what the firms look at. They're looking at technology in terms of logistics, production impact, new products, a disruption to the market, if you will, traceability and transparency, improved economics, and even compliance. Whereas consumers look at food technology, food safety technology, in terms of an actual increase in food quality and safety, convenience, the experience, user experience, improved health, sustainability, and even environmental impact. So it's not necessarily the same exact perspective, if you will, that consumers have in terms of how technology can be used, in comparison to what industry often looks at. And this makes sense if you think about it. When you look on the left here, with corporate social responsibilities, they have economic responsibilities, legal responsibilities, ethical, before they ever get to the ethical and philanthropic responsibilities. Humans, consumers, workers, even, they need to make sure that they have sleep and food and water and air. You can't think about any other needs unless those basic physiological needs are satisfied. Then you need your personal and safety and security, financial health and well-being, um, um, to be taken care of again before you can start thinking about these higher levels: friendship, family, self-esteem, and self-actualization. So some of the very basic human needs are often a mismatch in terms of there's no legal or economic advantage or requirement in some cases, for the food industry to provide that for the consumer. If anything, those are more aligned with the ethical and philanthropic responsibilities for a firm. Uh, so you have kind of a diagonal connection there. And this is where you can kind of see where there might be a disconnect between how the industry and consumers look at technology, and how corporate social responsibilities aligns with the hierarchy of human needs. Over the past 28 years or so, there's been a number of major cases that have pushed these issues. Everything from the landmark Jack in the Box E. coli outbreak in 1993, leafy greens in 2006, and we would see this again 2018, 2019, 2020. Decosters, Bluebell, Chipotle, Maple Leaf, and the impact on the Canadian landscape. Peanut Corporation of America, Jensen's Farms. These are just a simple list of iconic incidents that have really pushed why we need improved use of technology, not only for compliance, but for transparency and traceability. And it's not necessarily that the technology for food safety is different than the food safety for other areas. When you look at food quality, which is appearance, smell, touch, uh, your food safety, biological, chemical, physical, food defense, terrorism, economically motivated adulteration, industrial sabotage, food security, and here's where we talk about sustainability, availability, access, and then food fraud, uh, adulteration, theft, counterfeit, um, um, simulation, tampering. We can look at technology in terms of how the same exact technology for for prevention of food fraud, for instance, could play a role in supporting compliance for food safety or in preventing food defense failures. So it's not exactly as if you have to have food technology that meets a siloed need. Food technologies, food safety technologies could meet other needs as well. And with this technology, again, here we're seeing food safety management, supplier management, business intelligence, compliance for food standards and retailer standards. And as I mentioned earlier, traceability and transparency. We're seeing an increased use of everything from Internet of Things, machine learning, artificial intelligence, app, computer app, data collection. So many different platforms and technologies, hardware and software, are part of this bigger technology ecosystem, if you will. It's not any one of these, it's not any one device or one program. It really is this ecosystem of different technologies in a rather diverse and complex global food supply system that we have to be able to not only manage, but to interpret, to investigate, to act upon. And that complexity, you look at the idea of the food uh, harvest and growers, producers, raw agricultural commodity storage, food manufacturers, distribution, logistics, wholesalers, food retailers, food service, and obviously consumers. But the last year has really cemented the idea of this, how importance of even how third party delivery between food retailers and food service has grown. In fact, I was talking with someone I work with recently about how he had a conversation with his adult sister and with his mother, and he uh, had no problem imagining how his adult sister would use app-based ordering and third-party delivering, but was a bit surprised to find that his mother was doing it as well. Saying that a year ago, 2 years ago, she never would be using this at her age, and surprised that here we have older adults using this as well. And that complexity in terms of app-based opportunities over the last year, we have not only ordering online for pickup from a restaurant or from a grocery store, we have an increase in direct-to-consumer sales, especially from local farms, online sales, um, and like I mentioned before, local farms, farmers markets, I have noticed in places where fishermen bring their food, they bring their catch, excuse me, back to the pier and would normally go to restaurants. But as those restaurants are closed during the pandemic, they start offering, local consumers can basically whatever, $10 a pound, whatever it is, buy a 5 pound bag of this. So now you have, again, direct sales to, driving up literally to the side of the pier, to the boats. So radical shifts in terms of the characteristics of our food supply system as they are not only being shaped by technology, but having to meet the demands of the current pandemic and how technology is able to play a role in that. And as you can imagine, food, I just want to put this out there, food is an essential part of our rites of passage. for our families. Everything from parents getting over the fear of figuring out what to do in terms of school lunch. Our kids become teenagers, they start cooking on their own. Maybe they get a car, they start eating away from home and shopping for themselves. And of course, now they have bills. Then many in the United States, nearly 50% of people's first jobs have something to do with the food supply chain, restaurant, grocery store, etc. And then obviously at the point where you're raising children, you're starting to deal with the needs of and focusing on food. Just yesterday, I was at the grocery store wearing a mask, but talking with someone who was doing some of those um, that job of shopping for someone else, Instacart, shopping for someone else. And what I found fascinating was this young gentleman. I'm sure he was doing a great job, but he was asking questions of the person who worked in the meat area about what's the difference between um, range free and cage free chicken. And the guy working in the meat department didn't know the answer to that. And so I just thought it was an interesting conversation. And then I intervened and was trying to explain it to him. Um, here's this person who's shopping for another person and is making a decision based on their preferences and didn't understand what some of the terminology on the packaging meant. So at the grocery store, we can look at the idea of the earlier the growth from barcode to blockchain. The Kroger company, which runs the largest supermarket chain in North America, in 1966, they published this booklet, "Dreaming a Little." Could an optical scanner read the price and the total sale? Faster service, more productive service is needed desperately. They didn't have to wait too long for that. Not even 8 years later, grocery industry advisors searched for a solution to standardize the storing of products' pricing information. Their work came to fruition in 1974 when in Ohio, a worker for the very first time was able to swipe a pack of gum, swipe the Universal Product Code or UPC to get that information and to impact not only the stock supply, but to figure out what the price is for that item. It's something we take for granted today. I think in most of our in-person purchasing, we see a barcode or something of that nature being scanned. But to look back at the fact that, this was some 45, 46 years ago, only 8 years after it was kind of a dream, and today we're looking at some of these bigger stores. Now we look at the biggest retailers and their control over information technology. In some cases, it's seen as a shift in power. Looking at Walmart, for example, some experts have described Walmart's growth as basically their ability to control information technology. And we can see how 15 years after barcodes, we had different barcodes, the GS1 barcodes, and how they had even more information availability, starting to trace where it came from by 2011 with the Produce Traceability Initiative. But we need to realize that from 74 through 2011, all these were specifically paper-based regulation or sticker-based, if you will. How the future, when we look at blockchain, it would be digital. That idea of having easier access from more stakeholders, having quicker access, and being able to do more with that information, being able to have that connectivity within that technology and information ecosystem, such that we can minimize the response time and do more, as we'll talk about in a few seconds here. So Walmart describes itself as the world's largest retailer since having become the master of supply chain management. The retail giant has endeavored to become a leader in the area of implementing food I'm sorry, well, food, yes, but supply chain technologies to achieve the kind of operational efficiencies that makes these cost savings possible. In September, or excuse me, in 2018, Walmart put out, and here's a copy of this letter. Walmart put out a press release announcing that they will require real time end to end food traceability from its suppliers of leafy green vegetables by September of 2019. Specifically, their suppliers must use IBM blockchain technology. And if you think about this, this was during a period of time, 2018, we had leafy green issue. We had, again, more issues in 2019, but we still had leafy green issues, failures in terms of food safety in 2020. So let's expand on what Walmart was doing and what Walmart looks at in terms of blockchain and their actual goal. Um, they want to use it to digitize information and share information in a complex network in a secure and trusted way to improve food safety. Um, and this imperative from Walmart is not the first time that retailers, including Walmart itself, served as a driving force for technology change in the food industry. The first step towards the types of today's cutting edge technologies can be found over 50 years ago in what we talked about, the development of barcodes found commonly on today's food and packaging and labels. But we need to go a little bit further. So blockchain, and many ask about this. What is it? What does it mean? So blockchain is a form of regulatory technology that offers a decentralized e-ledger. So basically, it's not in the hands of just one company or one firm um, or one person. Um, it is a collection of blocks of information. Again, this is where blockchain gets its name. For each step from farm to fork, like we had described before. It lives in multiple locations at once, making it extremely difficult to edit, change, or forge. It's immutable in that it creates a permanent record which can be referenced quickly and with greater confidence than traditional records in the event of an emergency. So, Walmart itself describes blockchain as a way to digitize data and share information in a complex network in a secure and trusted way. For food safety, this helps to accurately pinpoint issues in the food chain and further protect customers against foodborne illnesses, right? So Walmart worked with IBM and 11 other food companies to develop a blockchain-enabled food traceability network built on an open source technology, and basically the idea of being able to trace an item from the store back to the farm in as little time as possible. This was done with mangoes, of all things. If we look at IBM's definition, IBM states that blockchain offers a complete visibility of the data behind many stages of product creation. Manufacturers, farmers, wholesalers, suppliers, delivery services, and stores each input information that details and verifies. That's a very important element. It's the verification of their roles in the process, creating a log that provides irrefutable evidence of a product's provenance. So there are, with this idea of verifying, this is lab tests, this is various qualifications for has it met this standard, has it met this definition that are in place there, and it becomes this kind of like a certificate, if you will, that travels along with food on its journey. Um, so let's look at this a little differently. Um, in 2019, I had the pleasure privilege of speaking in San Francisco on blockchain for food and beverage. During this event, Bob Wolpert, Golden State Foods Corp, that's a major food distributor, corporate senior vice president, stated that nobody is going to trust blockchain in the beginning. If you cannot define how the customer will benefit, then you cannot identify the business value. Kind of interesting that he said this, because we're already starting to see that there's what, again, the consumer perceives in terms of the role of blockchain and what the industry perceives. Industry, like we showed before, sees it for helping them lowering their costs, and it might also help, improve food safety. Consumers don't look at it in terms of, is it going to reduce costs, because they assume that there's going to be a cost with it, just like you pay more for organic or you pay more for certain certifications. They're assuming that you're going to end up paying more for a blockchain verified food. But in terms of paying more, we looked at this model before, but this is all reactive. If we look at blockchain as an ability to control issues before they become an incident, so before we have the need to alert the public about an incident, we can look at evidence and issues in a predictive analytics stage before food enters the market. Notice these two slopes down below: options and liability. Essentially, if we can control it before, if we can control a failure, a food safety failure, a lack of compliance before it goes to market, we could prevent liabilities from existing. We could increase our options. We can increase the value of the technology. Um, and we also have to recognize, though, that this is adding to the complexity. But that idea of the value, studies have shown that a failure to comply, of having to deal with a recall, having to do with an outbreak, having to do, and this is across not just the food industry, but multiple sectors. On average, failure to comply and failure to prevent these issues from entering the market costs about 17 times more than the cost of getting it right the first time before it goes out to market. Obviously, there's some variation in that from different industries, but on average, we know this to be true. But let's talk about this complexity. This complexity is due to the fact that we have to have a significant shift in the way we think about systems. We may even need policy changes, and we have to accept the ambiguity. That idea of when a recall costs X amount, you can clearly put that economic value on that. But what about convincing stakeholders or the finance department that preventing an outbreak would cost this amount of money? Because there's nothing to prove that that's how much you're actually preventing. Um, I think of it like the whistle that you can blow that you can't hear, but you're told that it could prevent a polar bear from attacking you, kind of a scenario. You know, you can blow it all the time, but do you really know that it actually prevented a polar bear from attacking you? Because you never saw it. Some people will say there's no value to invest into that. Other people can be convinced of that value. I think one of the biggest issues in terms of this kind of predictive, proactive element, when you look at all those stages we talked about before the food's journey lands it on the shelf at a retail or a restaurant, is this idea of ownership. Who owns the responsibility and the various steps and protocols along food's journey to look for this evidence and to look at these issues and to take the control? So these are going to be some issues that we have to deal with as we go forward looking at technology. And as I said before, some people are looking at blockchain as a golden ticket, but there's no one silver bullet, if you will. There's no one golden ticket. It is a combination of this ecosystem of Internet of Things and artificial intelligence and data collection, data management, data security, data access, data interpretation, things of that nature. Ultimately, we look at this idea of big data, but what we really want is actionable information. And the biggest difference, the thing that's going to allow us to convert big data into actionable information, is human literacy. We need to understand the way people work on the field, the way people work along food's journey, but also how does this impact consumers. What do consumers really need, really want, really value, prioritize, and are willing to invest in? We don't want to be data rich, but information poor. That ends up eroding the value of any technologies we invest in when it comes to food safety. And understanding that human part, that's really that intersection between data literacy, technological literacy, and human literacy. That's kind of the perfect place to be, to really start to understand where we are and where we are going in terms of this food safety technology ecosystem. I had the pleasure a few years ago, in 2017, of being in Dubai as they launched Food Watch, this Food Watch app, their version of blockchain, which completely digitized food safety and nutrition information for all food systems served throughout Dubai. Initially, they were focused more on halal and different certifications, as 98% of their food came from outside Dubai, as you can imagine. But this really started to impact and to be impacted by some things that we don't have necessarily the same elements or the same characteristics of here in North America. The social need, the social elements, the political foundation under which this was done, the economics behind being able to do this, and even the geographical limitations and expectations. So we have to take into consideration that what works in China, what works in Japan, what works in the UK, what works in Dubai is not necessarily going to be as easy or as effective with any solutions that we use here in North America. Um, but what we do know, and we learned this from the jungle, I still think that it's amazing how many people refer to it, but they've never actually read it, but they get the idea. But there's a quote from the literary review that appeared in a 1906 uh, uh, London Daily Times literary supplement, which described the book, but started off by saying that the things described by Mr. Sinclair happened yesterday, are happening today, and will happen tomorrow and the next day until some Hercules comes to cleanse the filthy stable. Um, I think that food safety requires a Herculean effort. We don't have a Hercules, a silver bullet, an actual hero person, one person that is going to come in and solve our food safety problems for us. But in reality, food safety requires a Herculean effort, an enormous amount of work, strength, and courage. Technology can help us with the work. Technology can improve our strength, but technology can't do anything about the very human centered element of courage. We have to have courage to look beyond return on investment, to look beyond cost benefit analysis, to realize that we can have technology for technology's sake, and we can have technology to make our stakeholders happy, but and stockholders, excuse me, stock owners happy. But is the technology actually in place to make it such that we can use it to improve the safety of our consumers? I think that when we talk about, in conclusion, building the future of food safety technology, there are so many different levels we have to look at, whether it's the humanistic approach, whether it's the technology, whether it's the data, whether it is the idea of is this done primarily at the retail or restaurant end, or all along food's journey, such that the journey of food is paralleled by the journey of the data and information that comes along with it, that we can be able to support reputation and trust of all the various points along the way, such that that person at the restaurant, the person at the grocery store can buy with confidence and have continued trust that the labels and the claims and the certifications actually are meaningful, and that this prioritization of technology is not just what will make it such that a company can earn greater percentages of profit, but that it truly is. If it's sold as technology that will make food safer, it actually does that job. Thank you very much. And with that, I think we have some time for questions.
Yes, we do. I think probably some of the attendees are wondering too, with traceability being kind of front, especially in Nova Scotia, because of the new Safe Food for Canadian regulations, everybody heard traceability is mandatory. How do we do that? Like, we don't have necessarily the technologies, like especially small to medium-sized businesses, even large businesses, especially with the cutbacks with 2020 and the pandemic, everybody's kind of hurting financially. Is there something that's, I guess everybody wants the easy button. They want to, start somewheres. So is there access or something available that people can at least start with besides paper? Because I know a lot of people are overwhelmed by the amount of paper that you need for traceability and to be able to trace everything from
Well,
start
we
to
know
finish.
from a few years ago when we were really at the worst point in 2018 with the outbreaks tied to leafy green vegetables. The FDA commissioner came out and said that the lack of digitization was the greatest barrier to this traceback and this traceability and transparency. So step one is going to be the digitization of the records. You can't you can't have traceability software doing anything if the information is not traced. And but even before that, we know that there are companies. I mentioned in this kind of a timeline piece about the Peanut Corporation of America. Peanut Corporation of America, this was a salmonella outbreak that killed 9 people tied to peanuts. They had all the documentation. They falsified the documentation. So even if you have great systems and great digitization, you still have to have a level of ethics and responsibility and compliance in terms of, are you accurately recording the right information in the right areas, from the right places, at the right time, at the right periodicity? Is there the validity and there's a bunch of different V's, the volume of data, the validity of the data, the veracity of the data. Do you have the confidence in who is entering this data? And then once you have the data, you start to be, you have to think about the data security and access. And then you get into the idea of, well, who is interpreting this data? If your plan is to have a bunch of IT people creating some, artificial intelligence program and doing this data interpretation, that's not going to be the solution. You have to have leadership and people in place that can interpret this data and say, this is what we need to do, this is what this is telling us, this is the big picture. But even then, you have to have leadership that's willing to say, we need to act on this, we need to follow up on this, it's telling us this, is this actually true? To do everything from a mock recall to a mock contamination event to see if the technology actually picks up on this, because we talked about that idea of the polar bear whistle, and I know it sounds like a strange analogy, but you're going to have those companies that go, well, I can't actually tell you if it works until you put me in the proximity of a polar bear and I blow the whistle and I determine if it turns around and goes away. If we're using technology and we're failing to test it and run, again, mock contamination, mock failures, mock positives, whatever it is, to see if the technology picks up on this, to see if we can put this information into a blockchain and to see if the next stage user picks up. Because what good is it to have all this information and put it in and it goes from, let's say, the distributor or the manufacturer to the distributor to the retailer, and the retailer doesn't even look at it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No,
That it
or
has.
they have a different system that doesn't even talk to it.
Oh yeah, exactly there. So
That's
I'm
kind of
glad
a
we have
deal.
System X, but they're still using, System L or whatever,
Yeah.
they're still trying to read barcodes when everything is a QR code, and our
Yeah.
barcode reader doesn't read QR codes. We literally do have that situation right now. There is information that cannot be read or is not read, but hey, someone along the line is happy that that information was made available. And so we have to have this shift in terms of the end users, the consumers there that are really the ones who are going to demand that information, the retailers, the restaurants demanding that information. I mean, think about it. If you are if you're an independent restaurant owner, or maybe you're a manager or a franchisee, we have technology now that can determine if frozen foods were on a truck too long during a very hot day, and they were, they dipped below the they went into the danger zone, if you will, and you should be able to track that. Truck pulls up, you look at the data and say, the environmental controls were out of our spec, we're not going to accept this. Days are gone where we should have companies that accept it no matter what. That's what happened in 1993 with that Jack in the Box E. coli outbreak. Food was basically driven from Southern California, San Diego, all the way up I-5 along the coast of California, Oregon, into Washington State, to just even right under the Canadian border. And there was power failure, and it was left undelivered and unrefrigerated. And at the time, there was no monitoring of that. So the technology is not simply about the processing plants, and was it tested here, or when did it go through that inspection, but even with like temperature controls and environmental controls, um, that can be used, that could allow that, whether it's a grocery store or restaurant, to say we don't want this, not having to rely on the consumer to say I got sick from this, we need to do something different, we need to look into this. There's a case from about 6 or 7 years ago where the federal government had indicated to a grocery store that there was a lot number of ground beef that had tested positive, and they need to recall it, take it off their shelves. And the manager of the grocery store, this is a big national chain here in the U.S., decided that did not have enough information and no one had complained about it, so there's no reason to take it off the shelves, and continued to sell it for weeks and weeks and weeks, until they got a knock on the door from lawyers, because there was a 8-year-old boy who consumed that beef and had gotten ill with E. coli and died. And they were literally, like a fingerprint, able to trace it back to the company, to the lot number, to where it was sold, to the grocery store. Now the owner of the retail chain was devastated that a manager at one location decided that the federal government's notice was not enough information, that they tracked it to that store. Again, the breakdown, you can have all the technology. It can tell you it's on this shelf right here in this store, this location, here's the address, here's when it was put there. But if the people that are given that information don't see the necessity in terms of acting on it, then it's all for nothing. It's absolutely all for nothing.
So I would think, like coming from a manufacturing environment, you would normally in a recall situation, you'd follow up with those individual stores or that account manager and get confirmation that you got everything back or that they held it. Like must have been a disconnect there or something, or maybe they didn't
Well,
realize or didn't follow up.
here's an issue with the United States, in that there's a difference between the USDA and the FDA. The FDA has the ability to do a mandatory recall. The USDA does not. So they can only request that for instance, in this case, a grocery store voluntarily remove it from their shelves. And that was that letter. If it was truly recalled, in the United States, it is illegal to sell anything that has been recalled. In many places, it's illegal to if there's a government recall, it's illegal to continue to sell that. So that is that difference. In that case, here you have a policy disconnect. Even with all the technology in place, you have policy disconnects which limit the powers of the regulatory authorities. So when we look at the idea of building the future of food safety technology, again, I kind of talked about the economic and political. We have to make sure that policies are in alignment with the powers, the regulatory powers for that technology, and that if we're going to even want to say, well, let's look, well, okay, economic, it makes sense. It's an economic barrier to some because of the cost of the technology. Politically, okay, we have to have laws and policies in place to do this. Socially, well, we have to look at what are the social concerns, what are the public health concerns, how are humans, impacted or impacting this technology. But even geography, you talked about small facilities. There are small and distant facilities that, when you go to the grocery store, you assume that if it's in the grocery store, it must be from a reputable, manufacturer, a reputable brand, but you don't know what all ingredients went into it. So you're making a lot of assumptions in terms of the reputation you place on the food. And of course, no one says, I want to go buy some less than reputable food or ingredients, and I want to put myself and my family at harm, kind of a situation. So it is a complex issue that is not as easy as, oh, we bought that technology, we're good to go. Because anyone who says it's that easy, they're already going off in the wrong direction. At that event in San Francisco in 2019, I actually said that if you were walking down the street, standing there on the sidewalk in Gotham City, and for whatever reason, Batman's utility belt fell from the sky, landed on the sidewalk, and you pick it up and put it around your waist and go, "Oh, look, I'm Batman." Yeah, you're not Batman. You don't have the training and the mindset and the muscle memory and the experience and the level of ethics or the mission and the drive. It's not as easy as simply picking up a piece of technology or a piece of equipment and all of a sudden it's safer. There's so much more that goes into it.
Thank you very much. I don't see any more questions here. Please join us in, I guess it's February. Can't remember the date right off the top of my head, but it's for the Challenge of Media and Communicating Food Safety. So that'll be the last session we have in this series. I can't thank you enough for joining us from way over in California. Appreciate it very much. And I know our participants have learned a lot, and we're getting lots of good feedback from these webinars from you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I'm always happy to answer questions. If questions come up from this or a previous presentation, and I am looking forward to the media one. It's one of my newer areas of research. And I didn't talk about that too much other than the social media, how media is impacting the messaging around public safety, public health safety, and food safety in specific. And I'm really excited to talk about that next month.
Awesome. We'll see you then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.